The modest duplex on Washington Avenue falls into stunned silence as a woman in an elegant business suit stands at the front door, flanked by assistants carrying official documentation and briefcases filled with legal papers. Denise Jefferson's confused expression shifts to shock as she recognizes the well-dressed woman as the same homeless person her son Damon had helped just 12 hours earlier outside Hernandez Corner Market. "Good morning, Mrs. Jefferson," Margaret Sullivan announces, her voice carrying unmistakable authority and wealth throughout the small living room. "I'm Margaret Sullivan, CEO of Sullivan Real Estate Holdings. Some of you may not recognize me without my research disguise, as I've been conducting personal investigation into community kindness and human compassion." Her eyes find Damon, who stands frozen beside his mother. "Yesterday, your 14-year-old son, Damon, gave me his lunch money, helped me find shelter from the rain, and treated me with dignity when he thought I was homeless and desperate. He didn't know he was showing kindness to someone who controls a $2 billion real estate empire." The family freezes in recognition. The teenager who yesterday showed pure compassion to a stranger now holds the key to transformations that will reshape his family's entire future, and his life is about to change in ways he never imagined. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 24 hours earlier, Margaret Sullivan had been conducting the most unconventional personal research of her 52-year life. As CEO and founder of Sullivan Real Estate Holdings, a company worth $2 billion that had revolutionized affordable housing development and urban renewal, Sullivan possessed wealth that placed her among the nation's most influential business leaders and philanthropists. Sullivan's journey to extraordinary wealth had begun 30 years earlier when she was a struggling social worker who witnessed firsthand how housing instability destroyed families and communities. Her transition from social services to real estate development had been motivated by determination to prove that profitable business could serve social good rather than exploit human need. Her company had built its reputation on developing affordable housing that maintained dignity and quality while generating sustainable returns for investors. Sullivan's innovation was demonstrating that serving low-income communities could be both profitable and transformational, creating wealth while addressing systematic poverty through housing stability. But success had gradually separated Sullivan from the daily realities that had originally motivated her work. Private drivers replaced public transportation. Executive assistants handled routine interactions. Security details limited casual public engagement. Wealth had created comfort and opportunity, but it had also built barriers between Sullivan and the authentic human experiences that had once driven her passion for social justice. 6 months earlier, Sullivan had experienced what she privately called her disconnection crisis during a board meeting where executives discussed market optimization strategies for low-income housing development. The clinical language used to describe families struggling with housing insecurity had shocked her. Her own company was treating human hardship as business opportunity, rather than recognizing the dignity and potential of individuals facing economic challenges. That realization had prompted Sullivan to question whether her wealth was serving humanity or merely accumulating for corporate growth. She had built Sullivan Real Estate on the principle that business should improve lives, but she had lost touch with the lives her developments were supposed to enhance. Her decision to spend 2 weeks living as a homeless person represented unprecedented personal research, not for business strategy, but for reconnecting with the human experiences of poverty, kindness, and community support that she had studied academically but never experienced directly. Sullivan had prepared meticulously for her experiment. She had obtained authentically worn clothing from homeless service organizations, studied the mannerisms and survival strategies of individuals experiencing homelessness, and arranged for discreet security monitoring. to ensure her safety while maintaining the authenticity of her experience. The Riverside Heights neighborhood, where Sullivan had chosen to conduct her research, represented exactly the kind of community that her company's demographic studies characterized as target market for affordable housing development, but Sullivan wanted to understand the human realities behind those corporate classifications and community dynamics that statistics couldn't capture. 14-year-old Damon Jefferson lived with his mother Denise and 10-year-old brother Marcus in a two-bedroom rental duplex that consumed 60% of Denise's income from her job as custodian at Franklin High School. The Jefferson family's financial situation was stable but precarious, with every dollar carefully budgeted and no margin for emergencies or unexpected expenses. Denise had been raising her sons alone since their father's death in a workplace accident 5 years earlier. Her custodial work provided health insurance and steady income, but it required long hours and physical labor that left little energy for the additional employment that might improve their economic circumstances. Despite financial constraints, the Jefferson household was rich in love, values, and community connection. Grandma Pearl Jefferson, Denise's mother, lived in the same neighborhood and served as family anchor, providing childcare, wisdom, and the moral foundation that shaped Damon's character. Grandma Pearl had raised Denise with principles that emphasized kindness, generosity, and community responsibility regardless of personal circumstances. "Baby," she often told Damon, "having little money doesn't mean having little heart. We help people because that's what good people do, and goodness is the only wealth that really matters." These values had shaped Damon into a remarkably mature and compassionate 14-year-old who excelled academically despite the distractions of economic stress and family responsibility. He helped care for Marcus, contributed to household tasks, and maintained a 3.6 GPA while participating in Franklin High's debate team and volunteer tutoring program. Mr. Anthony Lewis, Damon's English teacher, had observed his character development with professional admiration. Damon demonstrates leadership qualities and empathy that are extraordinary for any age, Lewis had written in his evaluation. He consistently helps struggling classmates, mediates conflicts fairly, and shows genuine concern for others' welfare despite facing his own family challenges. Sullivan's research methodology had involved spending days in Riverside Heights public spaces, the community center, local parks, bus stops, and commercial areas, observing social dynamics and experiencing how people with wealth and privilege were perceived and treated by those facing economic hardship. What she had discovered over 13 days challenged every assumption her corporate market research had made about low-income communities. Rather than finding hopelessness, dependency, or social dysfunction, Sullivan had encountered resilience, mutual support, and genuine human decency that often exceeded the community spirit she observed in wealthy neighborhoods. The community members she had met while posing as homeless had shown her practical assistance, emotional support, and personal respect despite having limited resources themselves. Their generosity had been offered without expectation of reward or recognition, motivated by simple human compassion rather than strategic networking or tax advantages. Sullivan's experiment had been designed to last 2 weeks, but her encounter with Damon Jefferson would transform abstract research into personal relationship that would redirect her wealth toward purposes that honored the values she had witnessed in communities that corporate America often overlooked or underestimated. The 14-year-old boy who had helped a stranger was about to become the catalyst for philanthropic transformation that would demonstrate how individual kindness could inspire systematic change when supported by extraordinary resources and genuine commitment to human dignity. Margaret Sullivan sat on the weathered bench outside Hernandez Corner Market, A 2-week experiment in experiencing homelessness, having taught her more about human dignity, community resilience, and authentic generosity than 30 years of corporate philanthropy and market research had prepared her for. The afternoon rain had begun unexpectedly, driving most pedestrians into nearby businesses or under awnings, but Sullivan remained on the bench as part of her commitment to experiencing the reality of homelessness, without the safety nets that wealth typically provided during uncomfortable circumstances. Her appearance after 13 days of authentic homeless presentation was convincing. Worn clothing that showed the effects of sleeping outdoors, unkempt hair, and the careful posture of someone trying to remain invisible while occupying public space that others might consider her unworthy of sharing. Damon Jefferson emerged from Franklin High School at 3:42 p.m., walking the familiar route home that took him past the corner market, where he sometimes stopped to buy small items for his family when Denise had given him money for necessities or small treats for Marcus. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sullivan observed Damon's approach with the analytical skills that had built her fortune, noting his awareness of his surroundings, respectful interaction with community members, and obvious sense of purpose that suggested family responsibilities and personal maturity beyond his 14 years. What Sullivan hadn't anticipated was that Damon would notice her at all. Most people had avoided eye contact during her homeless experiment, their discomfort with visible poverty creating invisible barriers that isolated her more effectively than any physical boundaries. But Damon paused in his walk, studying Sullivan with compassionate concern rather than fearful avoidance. His expression showed the kind of empathetic assessment that suggested familiarity with economic hardship and genuine care for others experiencing difficulty. The rain intensified as Damon approached Sullivan with respectful caution, his family's teachings about kindness and safety creating careful balance between helping others and protecting himself. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Damon asked politely, his tone carrying sincere concern without condescension or pity. "The rain's getting worse, and you're going to get soaked sitting out here." The direct offer of concern surprised Sullivan, who had become accustomed to being ignored or actively avoided by most people who encountered her during her research. Damon's tone carried genuine care rather than obligation or performative charity. Sullivan responded in the voice she had developed for her homeless persona. "I'm all right, son. Just waiting for the rain to pass. Thank you for asking." But Damon's assessment wasn't satisfied by polite deflection. His experience with economic insecurity had taught him to recognize when adults were minimizing their needs to avoid burdening others, and Sullivan's obvious discomfort and lack of shelter suggested someone who needed practical assistance. "Ma'am, there's an overhang by the community center about 2 blocks from here," Damon offered, pointing toward the direction of Riverside Community Center. "It's dry and warm, and they usually let people wait inside during bad weather." His suggestion demonstrated practical knowledge of community resources while maintaining respect for Sullivan's dignity and autonomy, offering information, rather than assuming she needed direction or couldn't solve her own problems. The rain continued intensifying, soaking through Sullivan's worn jacket and confirming that her commitment to authentic homeless experience would include genuine physical discomfort and potential health risks. "That sounds helpful," Sullivan replied, standing slowly to suggest the physical challenges that came with sleeping outdoors and lacking proper shelter. "I appreciate the information." Damon's response revealed character that went beyond providing directions. "Ma'am, I can walk with you if you want. The streets around here get confusing when it's raining hard, and some of the older buildings don't have good lighting." His offer of personal assistance represented significant investment of time and potential safety concerns. Walking with an unfamiliar adult through weather conditions that would make the journey longer and more difficult. As they began walking together, Damon naturally adjusted his pace to accommodate Sullivan's apparent physical limitations while maintaining conversation that treated her with dignity and respect rather than the condescending sympathy that Sullivan had encountered from others during her experiment. "I'm Damon," he introduced himself with the courtesy that Grandma Pearl had taught him for interactions with community adults. "I live around here with my mama and little brother. We've been in Riverside Heights for about 6 years. His willingness to share personal information demonstrated trust and social openness that contrasted with the defensive caution that many people showed toward individuals experiencing homelessness. "Thank you, Damon. I'm Margaret," Sullivan replied, using her actual first name while maintaining her experimental identity. "I appreciate your kindness. Not many people stop to help anymore. My grandmama taught me that when you see someone who needs help, you help them if you can," Damon explained as they walked through the rain. "She says kindness doesn't cost anything, but it means everything to people who receive it." The theological and moral framework that guided Damon's actions revealed values that prioritized community welfare over individual convenience, and service to others as fundamental responsibility rather than optional charity. When they reached the community center, Damon discovered it was closed for maintenance, leaving Sullivan without the shelter he had promised. Rather than considering his obligation fulfilled, Damon faced a choice between his own comfort and continued assistance for someone in need. "Ma'am, the center's closed today," Damon said, genuinely concerned about Sullivan's welfare. "But there's a covered bus stop about 4 more blocks that way, or—" He paused, making a decision that reflected his family's values about hospitality and community care. "Ma'am, if you don't mind walking a little further, my grandmama's house has a covered porch where you could stay dry. She always says our porch is open to folks who need shelter from storms." The invitation represented extraordinary generosity and trust, offering family property and introducing a stranger to his grandmother. Despite potential risks and without knowing anything about Sullivan beyond her apparent need for help. The conversation between Damon and Sullivan continued as they walked through Riverside Heights toward Grandma Pearl's house, their shared journey creating the kind of authentic human connection that Sullivan had been seeking throughout her experiment but hadn't found until this 14-year-old boy had offered genuine hospitality, without expectation or agenda. As they approached Grandma Pearl's modest house with its welcoming front porch, Damon began preparing Sullivan for the introduction, while revealing family dynamics and community values that had shaped his character and worldview. "My grandmama's probably in the kitchen getting dinner ready," Damon explained as they climbed the front steps. "She always makes extra food because she says you never know when somebody might need a meal. She's going to want to feed you, so I hope you're okay with that." His casual mention of family hospitality revealed household culture where serving others was normal practice rather than exceptional charity, suggesting values that prioritized community care over individual accumulation or convenience. The front door opened before they could knock, with Grandma Pearl Jefferson appearing in the doorway, her expression showing immediate concern for both her grandson's wet condition and the stranger he had brought to their home. "Damon, baby, you're soaked through," Pearl said, her maternal attention focusing first on family welfare before addressing the visitor. "And who's this lady you brought home?" "Grandmama, this is Miss Margaret." Damon introduced Sullivan with formal courtesy that demonstrated family teachings about respect and hospitality. "She was caught in the rain with no place to stay dry, and the community center was closed. I told her you wouldn't mind if she used our porch to wait out the storm." Pearl's response revealed family values that prioritized hospitality over security concerns or inconvenience. "Child, nobody should have to sit outside in weather like this. Miss Margaret, you come inside right now and get warm. Damon, go get some towels for both of you. The immediate invitation into their home represented extraordinary trust and generosity from a family whose economic circumstances made them vulnerable to exploitation or theft, yet whose values demanded offering shelter and comfort to anyone in. Denise Sullivan found herself welcomed into a living room that showed careful maintenance despite limited resources, furniture that was older but clean and comfortable, family photographs that suggested strong relationships and community connections, and religious imagery that revealed spiritual foundation for the generosity she was experiencing. Miss Margaret, you sit down right here by the heater and get those wet clothes dried out, Pearl instructed with the authority that came from decades of caring for family and community members. I'm going to fix you something hot to drink and get you warmed up. The hospitality was offered without questions about Sullivan's circumstances, background, or intentions. Simple human response to another person's need for shelter and comfort during difficult circumstances. Damon returned with towels and dry clothing that belonged to his late grandfather, his gesture indicating family comfort with sharing personal belongings with someone they had just met. These might be a little big, but they're clean and warm, Damon offered, his practical assistance continuing the pattern of generosity that had characterized their entire interaction. Marcus Jefferson, Damon's 10-year-old brother, arrived home from after-school care and accepted Sullivan's presence without question or concern, his casual greeting suggesting family culture where helping strangers was normal rather than unusual. "Hi," Marcus said simply, hanging up his backpack and beginning his homework at the kitchen table where he could participate in family conversation while completing academic responsibilities. Pearl began preparing what she described as just a little something to eat, but Sullivan could observe through the kitchen doorway that the meal preparation involved significant portions of the family's food supply and careful attention to nutrition and presentation that honored guests regardless of their apparent circumstances. "Miss Margaret, do you have family around here?" Pearl asked while cooking, her question motivated by genuine concern rather than suspicious investigation. It's hard being alone in strange places, especially when the weather turns bad. Sullivan's response required careful balance between maintaining her experimental identity and responding honestly to sincere care. "No, ma'am, I don't have family nearby. I've been on my own for a while now, trying to figure out my next steps." The partial truth reflected Sullivan's actual emotional isolation despite financial security and her genuine uncertainty about how her wealth should serve human connection and community building. Pearl's reaction demonstrated the practical wisdom that came from years of community service and family leadership. "Well, honey, sometimes the Lord puts people in our path when we need them most. You're welcome here as long as you need somewhere safe to." Indeed, the theological framework that guided Pearl's hospitality revealed values that viewed service to others as spiritual obligation rather than optional charity, and community care as expression of faith rather than social convenience. Denise Jefferson arrived home from her custodial work to find a stranger sharing dinner with her family. But her response reflected trust in her mother's judgment and family values about hospitality. "Mama, I see we have company," Denise said, greeting Sullivan with polite warmth while assessing the situation for any potential concerns about her children's safety. "Denise, this is Miss Margaret," Pearl explained. "Damon found her caught in the rain and brought her home for shelter. We're just making sure she's fed and warm." Denise's acceptance of her son's decision to help a stranger revealed family unity around values of community service and mutual aid, despite potential risks and economic constraints that made sharing resources challenging. As the Jefferson family shared their evening meal with Sullivan, treating her as honored guest rather than burden or charity case, Sullivan recognized that she was experiencing exactly the kind of authentic human connection and moral community that her wealth had been designed to serve but had somehow lost touch with during her rise to extraordinary success. While Margaret Sullivan shared dinner with the Jefferson family. Her absence had triggered comprehensive search operations across multiple organizations and agencies, all focused on locating one of America's most influential business leaders, whose disappearance had created concerns ranging from corporate security to market stability. Jonathan Pierce, Sullivan's personal assistant for 12 years, had been monitoring her personal research project with growing anxiety that approached professional alarm. Sullivan had informed only Pierce and Security Chief Captain Daniel Rodriguez about her homeless experiment, requiring absolute secrecy that prevented broader organizational awareness of her location and activities. Ms. Sullivan has been unreachable for 16 hours, Pierce reported to Foundation Director Amanda Clark via secure communication. Her tracking devices show movement in the Riverside Heights district, but she's not responding to emergency contact protocols. Clark, who managed Sullivan Real Estate Holdings charitable foundation and understood her employer's recent interest in poverty research and community connection, had been briefed on the general parameters of the experiment, but not its specific methodology or timeline. Jonathan, the City Planning Commission meeting is scheduled for tomorrow morning, Clark reminded him. Sullivan has 3 major development proposals requiring her personal presentation, and the Housing Authority contracts need her signature. If she's extended this research beyond her planned timeline, we need contingency protocols. The corporate implications of Sullivan's absence extended beyond scheduling inconvenience to fiduciary responsibility and market confidence. Sullivan Real Estate Holdings was a major player in affordable housing development whose stock performance could fluctuate based on rumors about CEO availability and decision-making capacity. Captain Rodriguez had been conducting discreet surveillance from sufficient distance to maintain Sullivan's experimental authenticity while ensuring her physical safety through advanced monitoring technology that tracked her location without interfering with the social dynamics she was trying to observe. Subject has been stationary at residential address for 3 hours. Rodriguez reported to his security team. She's inside private residence with family that appears to be providing shelter and assistance. No security threats identified, but prolonged interaction may compromise operational security. Rodriguez's professional concern was balancing Sullivan's research objectives with protection protocols that assumed certain levels of risk were unacceptable regardless of personal or academic interest. Robert Martinez, Sullivan's financial manager and longtime business partner, had been reviewing market conditions and development opportunities that would require Sullivan's immediate attention upon her return from the research experiment. Martinez was one of the few people who understood Sullivan's psychological motivation for the homeless experiment, a search for authentic human connection and moral purpose that extraordinary wealth had made increasingly difficult to access. Naturally, Margaret's been struggling with isolation and disconnection that comes with extreme wealth. Martinez had explained to Clark during confidential consultation. This experiment isn't just academic research, it's personal. Journey designed to reconnect her with human experiences that her billionaire lifestyle has made impossible to access through normal social interaction. Attorney Helen Foster, Sullivan's legal counsel, had been preparing documentation for the philanthropic initiatives that Sullivan planned to implement based on her research findings. Foster understood that Sullivan's experiment was likely to result in significant charitable commitments that would require careful legal structuring and tax optimization. Based on her preliminary discussions, Sullivan is planning major foundation expansions focused on housing stability and community development, Foster told her legal team. We need to be prepared for charitable commitments potentially exceeding $500 million, with emphasis on direct community investment rather than traditional grant-making. Meanwhile, at Franklin High School, Mr. Anthony Lewis had noticed Damon's absence from after-school tutoring and wondered about his whereabouts. As Damon's teacher and academic mentor, Lewis was familiar with Damon's routine and his family's emphasis on consistent educational engagement. Damon Jefferson didn't show up for debate team practice today. Lewis mentioned to Principal Victoria Hayes during end-of-day administrative coordination. That's unusual for him. He's one of our most reliable students and takes his commitments seriously. Hayes had been tracking academic achievement and student welfare indicators as part of district accountability requirements, and Damon's consistent performance made any deviation from routine noteworthy. Mrs. Rosa Hernandez, who owned the corner market where Sullivan had been sitting during the rainstorm, had observed Damon's interaction with the homeless woman and mentioned it to other community members as example of the character development and community values that local families were instilling in their children. The Jefferson boy helped a homeless lady during the storm, Hernandez told Pastor William Jackson during their evening conversation. Walked her through the rain to make sure she found shelter. That's the kind of character Pearl Jefferson has raised in that family. Pastor Jackson had been observing community dynamics and mutual aid networks that provided informal support, systems for residents facing various challenges, understanding that individual acts of kindness often revealed broader patterns of community resilience and moral foundation. The Jefferson family represents the best of our community values, Jackson told his wife during their own evening routine. Damon's kindness to strangers reflects the spiritual and moral education that Pearl and Denise have provided, despite their own economic challenges. At Sullivan Real Estate Holdings headquarters, multiple departments were preparing for next day operations while monitoring communication channels for any updates about their CEO's research experiment and expected return to corporate responsibilities. Chief Operations Officer Patricia Young was coordinating with development teams to ensure business continuity during Sullivan's extended absence. All department heads should be prepared to proceed with scheduled projects pending Ms. Sullivan's return. Her research timeline was flexible, but market opportunities require consistent progress. As various networks of concern and protection operated around both Sullivan and the Jefferson family, neither the billionaire nor the 14-year-old understood that their spontaneous friendship was occurring within complex systems of care, security, and institutional interest that would soon converge around their relationship and transform individual kindness into systematic community development. Margaret Sullivan sat in the Jefferson family's modest living room as evening settled over Riverside Heights, processing the profound impact of her encounter with authentic community values while recognizing that her research experiment was nearing its planned conclusion and would soon transform into operational philanthropy, guided by the moral lessons she had learned. The dinner conversation had revealed family dynamics, community networks, and value systems that challenged every assumption her corporate market research had made about low-income communities and their capacity for mutual aid, moral leadership, and sustainable development through internal resources and external partnership. Sullivan activated her encrypted emergency communication device, breaking the radio silence she had maintained throughout her experiment, to contact Jonathan Pierce with instructions that would begin transforming her research into philanthropic implementation guided by the authentic human connections she had discovered. Jonathan, I need you to prepare for immediate transition from research phase to operational community investment, Sullivan communicated via secure message. Tomorrow's meetings will focus on comprehensive foundation, restructuring, and neighborhood development initiatives based on field research findings that have exceeded all expectations. Pierce's relief at hearing from Sullivan was evident in his immediate response. Ms. Sullivan, thank you for checking in. The foundation team has been prepared for significant announcements, and Director Clark has preliminary frameworks ready for your review. What level of resource commitment should we prepare to discuss? Sullivan's reply reflected the transformation that her experiment and encounter with the Jefferson family had created. Jonathan, we're looking at foundation expansion that will fundamentally change our approach to community development. I want to discuss housing, education, and economic opportunity, programs that build on existing community strengths rather than imposing external solutions. The scope of Sullivan's planned philanthropy represented fundamental shift from traditional charitable approaches that provided temporary assistance to systematic interventions that honored community wisdom while addressing structural barriers to economic stability and family prosperity. Captain Rodriguez received Sullivan's location update and confirmed security protocols for her transition back to regular operations. Miss Sullivan, we're prepared to provide discreet extraction whenever you're ready to conclude the research phase. Should we maintain surveillance of the family that's been providing assistance for ongoing security assessment? Sullivan's response revealed how profoundly the experiment had changed her perspective on security, privacy, and human dignity. Daniel, absolutely no surveillance of the Jefferson family. They showed kindness to someone they thought was homeless, and that generosity deserves protection, not monitoring. Any security measures should focus on ensuring their safety and privacy rather than treating them as subjects of investigation. Meanwhile, Damon had been helping with evening cleanup while observing Sullivan's obvious education and articulate communication style, which seemed inconsistent with long-term homelessness, but didn't diminish his family's commitment to providing hospitality and assistance. Miss Margaret, you seem like you've had good education and work experience, Damon observed, with respectful curiosity. Sometimes people go through hard times that don't reflect their abilities or character. My mama always says, circumstances don't define people. His mature assessment demonstrated understanding of economic instability and social complexity that exceeded typical teenage awareness, while revealing family teachings about human dignity that transcended economic circumstances. Sullivan's response required careful balance between maintaining her experimental identity and responding honestly to perceptive observation. You're very wise, Damon. Sometimes life takes unexpected turns that put people in situations they never imagined. Your family's kindness reminds me that good people exist everywhere, regardless of their circumstances. Grandma Pearl approached with additional practical assistance. Miss Margaret, honey, you're welcome to stay on our couch tonight if you don't have anywhere safe to sleep. The weather's supposed to get worse, and nobody should have to be outside in conditions like this. The invitation to remain overnight represented extraordinary trust and generosity from a family whose economic constraints made sharing space and resources genuinely costly, yet whose values demanded offering shelter and protection to anyone facing need. Foundation Director Clark was coordinating with legal and development teams to prepare for Sullivan's announced community investment initiatives, understanding that the CEO's research experiment had been leading toward significant charitable commitments that would require sophisticated implementation strategies based on Ms. Sullivan's preliminary communications. We're looking at community development initiatives that could exceed our current foundation assets, Clark told her team during emergency planning session. This isn't traditional housing development. This appears to be comprehensive community investment designed to address systematic poverty through resident empowerment. Martinez was analyzing financial implications of Sullivan's planned philanthropy, recognizing that substantial charitable commitments could affect Sullivan Real Estate Holdings' stock price and shareholder confidence depending on how they were structured and presented to investors and market analysts. Margaret's community investment needs to be framed as strategic business development rather than emotional response to personal experience. Martinez advised the corporate communications team, shareholders need to understand that addressing housing instability and community development serves long-term business interests while advancing humanitarian values. Attorney Foster was drafting legal frameworks for charitable initiatives that would provide tax benefits while ensuring maximum community impact through sustainable programs that created independence rather than dependency. Sullivan's vision appears to focus on housing, education, and economic development that creates lasting change rather than temporary assistance. Foster explained to her legal team, "We need structures that can scale rapidly while maintaining community control and measurable outcomes as multiple organizational systems prepared for Sullivan's return and the implementation of philanthropy, inspired by her encounter with the Jefferson family. Neither the billionaire nor the 14-year-old fully understood how their spontaneous friendship would catalyze systematic community development that would demonstrate how individual kindness could inspire institutional transformation when backed by extraordinary resources and genuine commitment to human dignity. The Jefferson family's living room became the epicenter of a revelation that would transform not only their own lives but the entire Riverside Heights community, as Margaret Sullivan prepared to reveal how a 14-year-old boy's spontaneous kindness had reshaped her understanding of wealth, community, and the moral purpose of extraordinary resources. The morning sun streamed through modest windows as Sullivan sat at the kitchen table where the family was sharing breakfast, understanding that the moment had come to conclude her experiment and begin the most significant philanthropic commitment of her career. "Mrs. Jefferson, Grandma Pearl, Damon, Marcus," Sullivan began, her voice carrying a gravity that immediately commanded attention throughout the small kitchen. "Before I continue accepting your generous hospitality, I need to tell you something important about who I am and why your kindness matters more than you could possibly imagine." The family's expressions showed polite attention mixed with concern, their natural courtesy preventing them from asking direct questions about Sullivan's background, despite obvious inconsistencies in her appearance and educated speech patterns. "Yesterday, when Damon found me sitting in the rain outside the corner market, I wasn't actually homeless," Sullivan continued, her admission creating visible confusion and concern about deception. "I am Margaret Sullivan, the founder and CEO of Sullivan Real Estate Holdings, a company worth over $2 billion. The stunned silence that followed revealed the family's difficulty processing how someone of extraordinary wealth had been sitting alone in the rain, apparently desperate for shelter and assistance. Damon was the first to respond, his teenage directness cutting through adult politeness. "Miss Margaret, I don't understand. If you're really a billionaire, why were you pretending to be homeless? And why didn't you tell us yesterday?" His question reflected both confusion about Sullivan's deception and concern about whether his family had been manipulated or exploited through their generosity and trust. Sullivan's explanation revealed the profound personal transformation that had motivated her experiment. "Damon, I've been conducting research to understand what my wealth should serve and how extraordinary resources can address human need rather than just accumulating. I wanted to experience poverty directly and observe how communities respond to people facing hardship." Denise Jefferson's protective maternal instincts immediately focused on potential exploitation. "Miss Sullivan, while I appreciate your research interests, my family provided genuine hospitality to someone we thought needed help. If this was an experiment, we deserve to know whether our kindness was being studied or evaluated for some purpose." Her concern reflected legitimate worry that wealthy individuals might exploit poor families' generosity for academic or business purposes without considering the emotional and practical costs to those providing assistance. Grandma Pearl's response demonstrated the wisdom that came from decades of community leadership and spiritual guidance. "Miss Margaret, if the Lord put you in our path so we could show you something about kindness and community, then that's his purpose, regardless of your circumstances. Rich or poor, you needed shelter from the storm, and we were able to provide it. Her theological framework transformed potential deception into divine providence, suggesting that authentic human connection transcended economic categories and experimental methodologies. Sullivan's next revelation would demonstrate the extraordinary scope of transformation that their kindness had inspired. Mrs. Jefferson, your family's generosity has convinced me to restructure my entire approach to philanthropy and community development. I want to announce a $500 million investment in Riverside Heights, starting with your family. The magnitude of proposed philanthropy created visible shock among family members who had never encountered such extraordinary financial resources or considered the possibility that their modest hospitality could inspire institutional change. Marcus, with 10-year-old directness, asked the question that adults were too overwhelmed to articulate. Miss Margaret, are you saying our family is going to be rich now? Sullivan's response revealed her commitment to empowerment rather than dependency. Marcus, I'm saying your family is going to have opportunities to build wealth through education, home ownership, and business development that honor your values and hard work, rather than replacing them with external charity. Jonathan Pierce appeared at the front door with official documentation and foundation representatives. Having received Sullivan's emergency contact and coordinated immediate response to begin implementing the community development initiatives her research had inspired. Ms. Sullivan, we're prepared to begin immediate community investment protocols, Pierce announced, his presence confirming Sullivan's identity and resources while demonstrating the institutional machinery that would transform individual kindness into systematic community development. Damon's mature assessment revealed understanding that exceeded his 14 years. Miss Sullivan, this feels overwhelming, but I want to make sure that whatever you're planning serves our whole community rather than just our family. Everyone in Riverside Heights works hard and deserves opportunity. His response demonstrated exactly the kind of community-minded leadership and moral character that had convinced Sullivan. Her wealth should serve individuals whose values aligned with social justice and collective prosperity. Foundation Director Clark arrived with preliminary development plans that had been prepared based on Sullivan's research findings. Ms. Sullivan, we have frameworks for housing acquisition, educational scholarships, small business development, and community infrastructure that can begin implementation immediately while maintaining resident control and decision-making authority. The comprehensive approach demonstrated Sullivan's commitment to systematic change rather than symbolic gesture, ensuring that her philanthropy would create lasting transformation rather than temporary assistance. As documentation was reviewed and initial commitments formalized, Sullivan understood that her encounter with the Jefferson family had created more than charitable obligation. It had established personal relationship and moral framework that would guide her use of extraordinary wealth for community empowerment rather than institutional control. The family who had shared their dinner with a stranger was about to become the foundation for community development that would demonstrate how individual kindness could inspire systematic change when supported by resources committed to human dignity rather than corporate profit. The 24 hours following Sullivan's revelation triggered a comprehensive mobilization of resources that transformed theoretical philanthropy into operational community development with unprecedented speed, scope, and commitment to resident control over their neighborhood's transformation. Foundation Director Amanda Clark coordinated with legal, financial, and development teams to implement Sullivan's $500 million commitment through mechanisms that would ensure sustainability, accountability, and community partnership rather than external imposition of solutions that ignored local wisdom and priorities. We're establishing the Riverside Heights Community Development Initiative with comprehensive focus on housing, education, economic opportunity, and infrastructure improvement, Clark announced to assembled foundation staff. Our approach emphasizes resident leadership, existing community strengths, and collaborative partnership rather than traditional top-down charitable programming. The implementation strategy reflected Sullivan's research findings about community resilience and mutual aid networks that provided foundation for sustainable development when supported by adequate resources and institutional partnership rather than replaced by external management. Dr. Jennifer Green, promoted to Director of Community Partnerships, began coordinating with Riverside Heights leaders to ensure that Sullivan's philanthropy would amplify existing assets rather than disrupting social networks and cultural values that had sustained families through economic challenges. Our first priority is comprehensive community consultation about resident priorities and development goals, Green explained during her initial meeting with Pastor William Jackson, Mrs. Rosa Hernandez, and other neighborhood advocates. Ms. Sullivan's experience taught her that communities possess wisdom and solutions that external resources should support, rather than override. Pastor Jackson's response revealed both appreciation and protective concern about philanthropic intervention. We welcome partnership that honors our community's dignity and builds on our existing relationships. But we've seen well-intentioned programs create displacement or dependency. How do we ensure this initiative serves residents rather than serving developers or donors' preferences? The question reflected sophisticated understanding of gentrification and philanthropic colonialism that Sullivan's research had prepared the foundation to address through community control and long-term resident protection rather than short-term charitable distribution. Meanwhile, the Jefferson family was experiencing their normal morning routine while processing the extraordinary news that their spontaneous hospitality had triggered institutional changes that would reshape their entire community's economic opportunities and social infrastructure. Denise Jefferson prepared for her custodial work while discussing with her family how to respond to philanthropic attention that could provide tremendous opportunities or create overwhelming pressure and unwanted publicity. Mama, this feels like a blessing, but I want to make sure we handle it right, Denise told Grandma Pearl as they discussed Sullivan's proposals. Damon showed kindness because that's who he is, not because he expected anything in return. We need to make sure this money serves our values rather than changing who we are. Grandma Pearl's response reflected family wisdom about maintaining integrity during significant life transitions. Baby, money doesn't change people's hearts. It just reveals what was already there. We've always believed in helping others and building community. Now we have resources to do more of what we've always done. Damon Jefferson, whose spontaneous kindness had catalyzed the Community Development Initiative, was processing the responsibility that came with inspiring such extraordinary philanthropic commitment while maintaining focus on his education and family obligations. Miss Sullivan, I'm grateful for everything you want to do for our community, Damon told Sullivan during their follow-up meeting. But I hope people understand that I helped you because it was the right thing to do, not because I was trying to get anything in return. I want our neighborhood to benefit, but I also want to stay the same person. His mature response demonstrated exactly the kind of character and moral reasoning that had convinced Sullivan her wealth should serve individuals whose values prioritize community welfare over personal gain. Mr. Anthony Lewis, Damon's teacher, who had observed his exceptional character development, was contacted by Sullivan's foundation to coordinate educational opportunities that would honor rather than disrupt Damon's academic progress and family relationships. Damon represents everything we hope education will develop: academic excellence combined with moral leadership and community responsibility, Lewis told foundation education specialists. Any opportunities should build on his existing strengths, while ensuring he remains connected to his family and neighborhood. Sullivan personally addressed community concerns during a public meeting at Riverside Community Center, ensuring that her philanthropy would be transparent and accountable rather than imposed through private agreements that excluded resident input and oversight. I want everyone to understand that this community development initiative belongs to you, not to me, Sullivan told the 200 residents who attended the meeting. My role is providing resources that support your goals rather than implementing my vision for your neighborhood. Mrs. Rosa Hernandez, speaking for local business owners, expressed both appreciation and concern about rapid change. Ms. Sullivan, we appreciate your investment, but small businesses like mine have served this community for years. How do we ensure development helps existing enterprises rather than replacing us with bigger companies? Sullivan's response demonstrated commitment to community-controlled development. Mrs. Hernandez, local businesses are community assets that should be strengthened, not displaced. Our business development program will provide capital, training, and market expansion for existing enterprises while supporting new entrepreneurship by residents. The comprehensive accountability framework included Community Oversight Board, with authority to approve or reject specific projects, ensuring that resident priorities would guide development rather than foundation preferences or corporate convenience. Federal tax authorities confirmed that Sullivan's Community Development Initiative qualified for maximum charitable deductions while meeting all accountability requirements for non-profit community investment, validating the legal structure and financial sustainability of long-term philanthropic commitment. Attorney Helen Foster announced legal protections for residents that would prevent displacement through gentrification or property speculation. Every family in Riverside Heights will receive legal assistance to secure home ownership, rental protections, or affordable housing guarantees that ensure community development benefits current residents, rather than attracting outside investors. The housing protection demonstrated Sullivan's understanding that community development must serve existing residents rather than creating opportunities for external profit at the expense of families who had built neighborhood social capital through decades of mutual support. Margaret Jefferson, Damon's 10-year-old brother, provided perspective that adults sometimes overlooked. Miss Sullivan, I want to make sure my friends can still afford to live here after all the improvements. Sometimes when neighborhoods get fixed up, kids have to move away from their friends. His concern about friendship networks and social continuity reflected understanding that community development must preserve relationships and cultural connections that provided stability and identity for children and families. Media coverage of Sullivan's Community Development Initiative attracted national attention to Riverside Heights, but Sullivan's communication strategy emphasized community strengths and resident leadership rather than philanthropic generosity or corporate social responsibility. The Jefferson family and their neighbors demonstrated values and community resilience that my wealth should serve rather than replace, Sullivan told reporters. This initiative succeeds when residents control their community's development rather than when outsiders receive credit for providing resources. Pastor Jackson was appointed to coordinate spiritual and social support for families navigating rapid community change, ensuring that development would strengthen rather than disrupt cultural and religious networks that provided meaning and stability. Community development that ignores spiritual foundation and social relationships creates prosperity without purpose, Jackson explained during interfaith coordination meetings. Our role is ensuring that material improvements serve families, complete well-being rather than just economic advancement. The accountability process concluded with establishment of permanent community control mechanisms, resident-controlled development board, annual community assemblies with veto power over projects, legal protections against displacement, and educational trust funds for neighborhood children that honored family values while expanding opportunities. Local elected officials announced policy changes that would support community-controlled development while preventing exploitation by external developers or speculators seeking to profit from philanthropic investment. The Riverside Heights Initiative demonstrates that community development can be led by residents rather than imposed by outside interests, announced City Council member Patricia Young. We're implementing zoning protections and affordability requirements that ensure neighborhood improvement serves existing families. As the first phase of implementation concluded, residents throughout Riverside Heights approached the Jefferson family to express gratitude for inspiring philanthropic attention while maintaining community values and social networks that had sustained them through economic challenges. Thank you for showing that our community deserves investment while staying true to who we are, neighbor Eugene Davis told the Jefferson family. Damon's kindness opened doors, but your family's values kept those doors open for everyone. The accountability framework ensured that Sullivan's extraordinary philanthropy would be measured by community outcomes rather than donor recognition, creating sustainable development that honored the moral foundation that had inspired institutional transformation through individual kindness, guided by family wisdom and community responsibility. Over the following 12 months, Riverside Heights underwent the most comprehensive community transformation in the city's history, implementing changes that served as a national model for philanthropic community development that empowered residents, rather than displacing them through gentrification disguised as charitable investment. The Riverside Heights Community Development Corporation, established under resident control with Sullivan Foundation support, was directed by a 7-member board including Grandma Pearl Jefferson, Pastor William Jackson, Mrs. Rosa Hernandez, and 4 other longtime residents who ensured local priorities guided all development decisions. We're not accepting charity or allowing outside control of our neighborhood, Grandma Pearl explained during the corporation's first annual meeting, attended by 400 residents. We're partnering with resources that respect our wisdom and amplify our existing strengths while providing opportunities we've earned through years of community building. The governance structure emphasized resident ownership of development processes rather than philanthropic management, ensuring that extraordinary resources served community vision rather than external preferences. Principal Victoria Hayes worked with Sullivan Foundation education specialists to implement the Academic Excellence and Community Leadership Program, providing enhanced learning opportunities, college preparation support, and scholarship pathways that built on Franklin High School's existing strengths while expanding possibilities for students like Damon. The Sullivan Education Partnership doesn't replace our school's mission, Hayes explained to parents during information sessions. It provides resources that help us better serve students who are already demonstrating exceptional potential and community responsibility while maintaining our neighborhood identity. Mr. Anthony Lewis was selected to direct the Student Community Leadership Initiative, using his understanding of resident values and student potential to create opportunities that honored families' sacrifices while preparing young people for expanded roles in community development and social justice. We're identifying students like Damon Jefferson, who demonstrate academic excellence and community commitment, Lewis told foundation coordinators. These young people represent our neighborhood's future leadership, and they deserve opportunities that match their character and potential. The Housing Stability and Ownership Initiative, managed through partnership with local banks and resident-controlled credit unions, provided down payment assistance, financial literacy education, and home ownership support that helped working families transition from rental to ownership while remaining in their community. Denise Jefferson was among the first residents to complete home ownership counseling, her stable employment and responsible financial management making her an ideal candidate for programs that recognized years of rent payments as evidence of housing readiness. "This program honors my years of working and paying rent on time," Denise told Foundation housing counselors. "Instead of treating me like a risk because I'm a single mother, it recognizes my reliability and commitment to providing stable housing for my children." The recognition-based approach validated residents' existing financial responsibility rather than imposing external standards that ignored their demonstrated housing success within economic constraints. Small Business Development and Expansion Center provided microloans, business training, marketing support, and commercial space for resident entrepreneurs, whose enterprises could serve community needs while creating local employment and economic circulation. Mrs. Rosa Hernandez received expansion funding that allowed her corner market to add fresh produce, educational supplies, and community meeting space while hiring 3 additional employees from the neighborhood and maintaining her family's cultural identity. The Sullivan Partnership respects businesses that have been serving this community for years, Hernandez explained during the market's expansion celebration. "They're helping us grow rather than competing with us or forcing us to change our character." Margaret Sullivan maintained quarterly involvement in community development while respecting resident autonomy and the Jefferson family's privacy preferences regarding publicity and recognition. "My role is ensuring foundation resources serve community priorities rather than imposing external agendas," Sullivan told foundation staff during planning meetings. "The residents understand their neighborhood's needs better than any outside consultant or development expert." The Community Health and Wellness Initiative established medical clinic, nutrition education programs, and mental health services that addressed healthcare needs while building on existing community support networks and traditional wellness knowledge. Grandma Pearl Jefferson was invited to coordinate intergenerational wisdom-sharing programs, her knowledge of traditional remedies and community care practices being documented and integrated with modern medical services rather than dismissed or replaced. "They want to learn from us instead of just providing services to us," Pearl told neighbors during health program orientation. "That's respect for our intelligence and experience, not just charity for our circumstances." Pastor Jackson's congregation received foundation support for expanding community programs, youth development, and social services that had been operating with volunteer labor and minimal resources for decades. "The Sullivan Partnership amplifies our existing ministry rather than competing with it," Jackson told denominational conferences. "They understand that communities have been providing development and support long before foundations discovered poverty." The Workforce Development and Economic Opportunity Program operated through partnership with local employers and trade organizations, provided job training, placement assistance, and career advancement support that connected community members with employment while addressing regional labor needs. Denise Jefferson enrolled in healthcare administration certification that built on her custodial experience while preparing her for supervisory positions that offered better wages, benefits, and scheduling flexibility than her previous employment. "This training recognizes my years of hospital work experience rather than starting from zero," Denise explained to other program participants. "It builds on what I already know while preparing me for advancement I've earned through reliability and hard work." Data analysis. 18 months into the initiative showed remarkable results. Homeownership increased by 67%. Local business revenue grew by 89%. High school graduation rates reached 98%. And college enrollment tripled among neighborhood students while maintaining strong community connections. Community-controlled development creates measurably better outcomes than external management, Dr. Green reported to Foundation board members. When residents direct their neighborhood's transformation, Every indicator improves while preserving social networks and cultural identity. 2 years after Damon Jefferson helped a homeless woman find shelter from the rain, Margaret Sullivan returned to Riverside Heights for the dedication of the Community Resilience and Leadership Center, a permanent symbol of the transformation from individual kindness to systematic community empowerment that now served as a national model for authentic philanthropic partnership. The transformation was evident throughout the neighborhood. Streets that had once shown signs of economic disinvestment now featured renovated housing, thriving businesses, and community spaces where residents gathered for education, recreation, and mutual support. The atmosphere of economic anxiety had been replaced by hope, opportunity, and collective pride in resident-controlled development. Damon, now 16 and flourishing academically through the Sullivan Education Partnership, while maintaining his community leadership role, approached Sullivan at the dedication ceremony, their friendship representing the personal relationship that had catalyzed comprehensive neighborhood transformation. "Ms. Sullivan, I want you to see something," Damon said, leading Sullivan to a bronze plaque installed at the community center entrance, reading, "In honor of everyday kindness that creates extraordinary opportunity. When communities receive resources that respect their wisdom, transformation serves everyone." The neighborhood wanted to commemorate what happened, but Grandma Pearl said it shouldn't be about individual recognition, Damon explained. It should be about the principle that kindness multiplies when people have resources and respect to build on community strengths. Sullivan's response reflected how profoundly the experience had changed her understanding of wealth and responsibility. "Damon, that's exactly right. What happened here wasn't about one person helping another. It was about recognizing the wisdom and values that exist in every community, and learning how extraordinary resources can serve those assets rather than replacing them." Denise Jefferson, who had recently purchased her family's home through the Housing Stability Initiative and completed healthcare administration certification, joined them with Marcus and Grandma Pearl for what had become an annual friendship celebration and community assessment. "Ms. Sullivan, I want you to know how much the Foundation's partnership has meant to our family and community," Denise said. "But what matters most is that you respected our intelligence and supported our goals rather than imposing outside solutions or changing our character." Grandma Pearl, whose traditional knowledge had been incorporated into community wellness programs while maintaining her role as neighborhood elder and wisdom keeper, provided perspective that connected individual kindness to systematic change. "Child," she told Sullivan, "what you learned from Damon is what we try to teach all our young people, that how we treat others reveals who we are, and that sharing creates abundance rather than scarcity. Your foundation understood that lesson and built programs that multiply community strength instead of just distributing money." The Riverside Heights Community Development Initiative had expanded to 27 cities nationwide, each implementation guided by local leadership and resident priorities while utilizing foundation resources to amplify existing assets and community vision. Rather than imposing standardized programming, Dr. Jennifer Green, promoted to National Director of Community Partnerships, had developed replication frameworks that emphasized resident control and cultural preservation rather than philanthropic management, ensuring that each site reflected local values and priorities. The Riverside Heights model works because it starts with respect for community intelligence and builds foundation support around resident goals. Green explained to philanthropists studying the initiative, that approach creates sustainability and ownership that traditional charity cannot achieve. Mr. Anthony Lewis, who had become Regional Education Director coordinating scholarship and academic support programs, reported that 96% of participating students were enrolling in higher education, with many choosing to return to their communities as teachers, healthcare providers, and business leaders. Students like Damon represent their community's investment in education and moral development, Lewis told education conferences. Our role is providing opportunities that match their potential while honoring family values and community connections. The initiative's economic impact had been transformational. Unemployment decreased by 73%, median household income increased by 54%, and community-owned businesses generated $34 million in annual revenue that circulated locally rather than flowing to external corporations. Margaret Sullivan had restructured Sullivan Real Estate Holdings corporate mission to integrate community partnership as core business strategy rather than supplementary charitable activity, demonstrating that social responsibility enhanced rather than hindered profitability and market performance. The Riverside Heights Partnership taught us that addressing housing instability and supporting community development creates market stability, expands customer loyalty, and generates social capital that supports long-term business success. Sullivan told shareholders during annual meetings Damon's academic achievements had earned him early admission to multiple universities with full scholarships, but his plans included studying community development and urban planning so he could return to Riverside Heights as a professionally trained advocate for resident-controlled neighborhood improvement. I want to use my education to help my community and other communities like ours, Damon told Sullivan during their anniversary conversation. You showed me that resources and knowledge should serve people's dignity and wisdom, rather than replacing community intelligence with outside expertise, as Sullivan prepared to leave Riverside Heights. After the dedication ceremony, she reflected on how a teenager's spontaneous generosity had taught her more about wealth, purpose, and authentic human connection than decades of business success and philanthropic consulting had provided. The community center where Damon had shared his umbrella with a stranger now anchored a neighborhood where children's kindness was supported by institutional resources, where families' hard work resulted in ownership and opportunity, and where community wisdom guided external partnership rather than being replaced by it. Most importantly, Riverside Heights demonstrated that authentic philanthropy required learning from recipients rather than imposing solutions, building on existing strengths rather than assuming deficiencies, and creating partnership rather than dependency. The boy who had helped a homeless woman find shelter had taught a billionaire that true wealth lay in community connection, mutual respect, and the multiplication of kindness through resources devoted to human dignity rather than philanthropic control. That transformation, from individual charity to systematic empowerment, from external solutions to community partnership, from temporary assistance to permanent opportunity, represented the kind of change that made extraordinary wealth serve extraordinary purpose in creating justice and possibility for all. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.